On Thanksgiving morning, in a kitchen I had paid for, with 12 people I had fed for 20 years, my daughter handed me a trash bag and told me to gather my things and be gone before the turkey came out of the oven. I'm Maybelle Crawford. I'm 68 years old. I set the bag down on the counter, looked at her, and said, "All right. But you'll want to remember this morning because it's the last good one you'll have for a long while." Then I picked up my coat and walked out into the cold, and I took back every single thing they thought belonged to them. If you're listening to me from somewhere far from home, do me a kindness and put your town in the comments so I can see how far my voice carries. And stay with me to the end. You'll want to hear how it finishes. Before I tell you about that morning, I need you to know who I really am. Not the woman they thought they could fold up and throw away like an old dish rag, the real one. Because that's the part they never bothered to learn, and that's the part that ended up costing them everything. I was born Mabel Foster in 1957 in a little wood frame house on the east side of Greenville, South Carolina, the kind of house where you could feel the floor breathe when the wind came through. My father drove a delivery truck for a furniture company, and my mother took in laundry and ironing for the big houses up on the hill. We didn't have much, but my daddy used to say a thing I've carried my whole life. He'd say, "Maybelle, keep your own ledger. Don't ever let another soul be the only one who knows what you're owed." He kept a little account book in his shirt pocket, and at night he'd sit at the table and write down every dime. I thought it was just a habit. I didn't understand yet that he was teaching me how to survive. I met my husband, Otis Crawford, at a church social in the summer of 1978. He was a quiet man, big hands, slow to speak. But when he laughed, the whole room turned to look. He worked at the textile mill out on the highway, the same mill his father had worked. We married in the spring of 1979 in the Fellowship Hall of Mount Pleasant Baptist with 40 folding chairs and a sheet cake my aunt made. We didn't have a honeymoon. We had a one-room apartment over a hardware store and a future we were going to build with our own 2 hands. Our daughter came in 1981. We named her Cherise, 7 pounds even, a head full of black hair, and a cry that could rattle the windows. I remember holding her that first night, counting her fingers over and over, promising her I'd give her every chance I never got. And I meant it. Lord, I meant it. Otis passed in 1989. The mill was cutting back, and he'd taken extra shifts to keep us afloat, and one Tuesday morning his heart just gave out on the line. 41 years old. I was 32, with an 8-year-old girl and $312 in a savings account at the First Citizens Bank on Main Street. I remember the exact figure because I wrote it down that night the way my daddy taught me, sitting at the kitchen table with my hands shaking. $312 and a child who still believed her mama could fix anything. So I went to work. I cleaned offices downtown before the sun came up, mopping floors and emptying trash cans in buildings full of people who never once looked me in the eye. Then I'd go home, ditch Reese off to school, and head to the diner where I waited tables until close. On weekends, I cooked. People in the neighborhood started paying me to cater their funerals and their family reunions, my fried chicken, my mac and cheese, my pound cake, and I'd be up till 2 in the morning with my arms in soapy water and rise again at 5. My hands cracked and bled every winter. My niece gave me grief by the time I was 40, but I had a plan, and I never once told a soul what it was. Every paycheck I took half and put it away in an account in my own name. Just mine. The teller, a kind woman named Pearl, would stamp my book and slide it back and say, "You're building something, Miss Maybelle." And I'd say, "Trying to, Pearl. Trying to." I drove a Buick with a cracked windshield for 14 years rather than touch that money. I wore the same winter coat so long it went out of style twice and came back. But every dollar I tucked away was a brick, and I was building a wall nobody could see. By the time Cherise was a teenager, I'd saved enough to buy us a real house. A little brick ranch on Lemmer Street, 3 bedrooms, a carport, a backyard with a pecan tree, $49,000 in 1996, and I put down nearly half in cash and financed the rest. The deed had one name on it. Mine. Maybelle Crawford, sole owner. I made sure of that. My daddy's voice was in my ear the whole time at that closing table. Never sign away what you can't get back. Cherise grew up in that house. I gave her everything I could, and a good bit I couldn't afford. Dance lessons, class rings, a prom dress that cost me a week's wages. When she got into the state university, I cashed out a little life insurance policy I'd been carrying on myself, the only thing of value I had besides the house, and I paid her first 2 years up front so she wouldn't graduate buried in debt the way so many do. She hugged me at the bus station and said, "Mama, I'm going to make you so proud," and I believed her with my whole heart. But something happened to my girl at that school, or maybe after it. She came home different, sharper around the edges. She started correcting the way I talked, the way I set a table, the way I dressed for church. She married a man named Preston Vale in 2006, a man who sold commercial real estate and wore a watch that cost more than my first car. His people were from Charlotte, the kind of family that summoned somewhere and used the word as a verb. His mother, Adele, looked at my house the first time she came to dinner like she was counting the ways it could be improved. I made my gumbo that night, the recipe my own mother taught me, the one Cherise grew up begging for. Adele took 2 bites, set down her fork and said, "It's very hearty, isn't it?" And my daughter, my own child who'd licked that pot clean as a girl, looked down at her plate and said nothing. Didn't defend the food, didn't defend me. That was the first crack. I felt it, small and quiet, like the first hairline fracture in a windshield that you tell yourself won't spread. But it spread. When their first child came in 2009, a little girl they named Sophie, I drove 40 minutes each way to help, and I was made to feel like the help. When their son came 2 years later, I learned about his birth from a group text 3 days after, the same message that went out to the man who did their lawn. I cried in my kitchen that night and didn't tell anyone. In 2014, Cherise and Preston came to me with what they called an opportunity. They wanted to buy a bigger house in a better district. For the children's schools, they said. They needed help with the down payment. $60,000. I sat at my kitchen table that night with my daddy's voice in my ear and a calculator and the little ledger I'd kept my whole life, and I did the math. I'd saved, by then, $141,000 and some change, every dollar of it scraped out at mopped floors and catered funerals. If I gave them 60, I'd have 81,000 left to live on for the rest of my days. I should have said no. Instead, I said I'd help them on one condition. My name went on the deed. Cherise's voice went thin. "Mama, why would you need to be on the deed?" And I said, because $60,000 is too much money to give and not protect. My name or no help. They argued. Preston's jaw got tight. But in the end, they wanted that money more than they wanted their pride. And they agreed. We closed on that house in the fall of 2014. $390,000. They put down 70 beer, 60 of it mine. And the deed listed 3 owners. Cherise, 24.5%. Preston, 24.5%. And me, Maybelle Crawford, 51%. The lawyer who handled it, a decent man named Whitman who'd known my late husband, pulled me aside before I signed and said quietly, "Maybelle, you understand what 51% means? You're the majority owner. If it ever comes to it, you can force a sale and they can't stop you." I told him I understood. I prayed I'd never need to. For 10 years, I watched my daughter become a stranger. Preston did well. They got the BMW and the Tahoe, the kitchen renovation, the pool, the trips to places I had to look up on a map. And the more they had, the smaller I got in their eyes. The Sunday dinners stopped. The phone calls stopped. I'd see them on Thanksgiving and Christmas, sitting on furniture I'd helped pay for, watching the clock. Cherise stopped calling me Mama in front of her friends and started saying, "My mother," cool and distant, like I was a fact she had to acknowledge, rather than a woman who'd bled for her. When people asked who I was at their parties, she'd say, "Oh, that's Maybelle. She helped us out years ago. Not your grandmother's recipes in that kitchen. Not the woman who put you through school. Just Maybelle. The help." I kept coming, though. Every holiday I'd cook all night and load up my Buick and drive over, bringing my sweet potato pie and my cornbread dressing and my collard greens. And every time, I'd find my dishes in the trash afterward, untouched, because Adele said my cooking was a lot, and my daughter agreed with her now. I saw it. I saw all of it. I just kept hoping she'd come back to me. The only one who never made me feel small was Sophie. She was 15 now, tall and watchful with my mother's eyes. She'd find me in the kitchen at every gathering and sit with me and ask me to tell her about the old days, about her great-grandfather and his little ledger, about how I'd built that first house dime by dime. "Grandma," she'd whisper, "you're the most interesting person in this whole family." And I'd laugh and tell her she needed to get out more. It was Sophie who warned me that Thanksgiving morning I'd gotten there early to help in the kitchen, the way I always did. I was peeling sweet potatoes at the counter when she came in and stood close and spoke low. "Grandma," she said, "I heard Mum and Dad talking last night, and Grandma Adele. They were saying things about you. About this being things about you. About this being the last year. About how you don't fit anymore. I don't know exactly what they're planning, but please be careful today." Then her mother's voice cut through from the dining room. "Sophie, come set the table." And she squeezed my hand and was gone. I stood there with a paring knife in my hand and a cold feeling settling into my chest. And I knew. Whatever was coming, it wasn't good. It came at 11 o'clock with the turkey still in the oven and the house full of the people Cherise wanted to impress. Adele was there, and Preston's brother and his wife, and 2 couples from the country club, and a man Preston was trying to do business with and his wife. 12 people, not counting the children. And me. Cherise came into the kitchen, and Preston came behind her, and Adele drifted in after to watch. My daughter set a black trash bag on the counter next to my sweet potatoes, smoothed her blouse, and said, "Mama, we need to talk. This isn't working anymore. You and us. We've grown in a different direction, and honestly, it's getting embarrassing. The way you talk, the way you show up here in that old coat with bags of food nobody asked for. It's a lot, and the kids are getting older. And we think it's best if you collect your things and go before everyone sits down. Quietly. Don't make a scene. I want you to understand. I didn't raise my voice. I've been quiet my whole life. I've learned the loudest thing a woman can do sometimes is go still. I said, "Do you want me to leave?" on Thanksgiving. And Preston, God help him, had the gall to laugh a little and say, "Look, my belle, let's not be dramatic. We'll send a check for whatever you think you're owed. It's not personal. It's just, you're a reminder of a chapter we've closed. People here don't need to know where Cherise came from." Where Cherise came from. He said it right in front of her. And my daughter. The child I bathed and fed and sat up with through every fever. The child I put through college on a cashed-out life insurance policy. My daughter looked at the floor and let him say it. Then she looked back up at me and said, "It's true, Mama. You don't belong in this life. You never did. I worked hard to get away from where we started, and every time you walk in that door, you drag it all back in with you." Behind her, Adele smiled. One of the country club wives in the next room laughed at something, and for one terrible second I thought she was laughing at me, and maybe she was. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I memorized her face the way you'd memorize the face of someone you're about to lose, because I was. I looked at the kitchen I'd helped build, the counters I'd helped pay for, the granddaughter peeking around the door frame with tears standing in her eyes. And I said, quiet and even, "All right, I'll go. But I want you to remember this morning, Cherise. I want you to remember exactly how it felt to hand your mama a garbage bag and call her an embarrassment. Because you're going to think about it a lot in the months to come." I picked up my coat. I left the trash bag on the counter and my sweet potatoes half peeled in the sink. I walked out the front door into the grey November cold, and I got in my Buick, and I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and not a single tear on my face. The crying came later. That morning, I had work to do. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair in my little house on Loomis Street, the house with my name and only my name on the deed, and I let myself feel all of it, 43 years of it. Every floor I mopped, every funeral I cooked, Every funeral I cooked. The wedding ring I'd never replace because I gave the money to her. The Christmases I spent alone because they had other plans. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, the grief burned off and left something harder and clearer behind. My daddy's voice came to me plain as day. Keep your own ledger. Don't ever let another soul be the only one who knows what you're owed. So at dawn I went to the closet and pulled down the fireproof box I keep behind my coats, and I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The deed to their house, with my 51% in black and white. The papers on the joint account Preston had badgered me into opening in 2017 for the kids' emergencies. The one with my name listed first, the primary holder, that I'd quietly fed money into and watched them treat like a slush fund, $38,000 in it now. And the loan I'd nearly forgotten. In 2019, when Preston's commercial deal went sideways, he'd come to me sweating, and I'd lent him $45,000 to cover it. And being my father's daughter, I'd had him sign a proper promissory note with a payment schedule and my attorney's name on the bottom. He paid back maybe 12. He owed me $33,000 with interest, and it was overdue, and it was enforceable. I sat and I added it up in my daddy's old way, every line written out. 51% of a house now worth $440,000. $38,000 in a joint account I had every legal right to empty. $33,000 and change on a note I could call in any day I chose. I stared at the bottom number for a long time. That was my answer to the garbage bag. That was the ledger they never knew I'd been keeping. Monday morning, I called my attorney, the same man Whitman, and I told him everything, the dinner, the trash bag, what my daughter said, what Preston said in front of her. He was quiet a long while. Then he said, "Maybelle, I'm sorry, that's a hard thing. What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to exercise every right I have, all of them. I want to call in the note, close that joint account, and force the sale of the house." He told me to come in. In his office, he laid it out. As majority owner, I could compel a sale of the property. As primary holder, I could close the joint account that day. And the promissory note was clean and overdue and collectible. "You understand," he said gently, "this will likely cost him his home and possibly his marriage. It's going to be a financial wrecking ball." I looked him in the eye and I said, "Robert, my daughter handed me a garbage bag in front of 12 people and told me I never belonged. He's about to learn what not belonging really feels like." We started that day. I drove straight to the bank. The young manager came out when he saw the size of what I was doing, and he asked politely if everything was all right. Did I want to think it over? And I told him plain. My daughter threw me out of a house I helped pay for on Thanksgiving and handed me a garbage bag to do it. I'm taking back what's mine. Is that reason enough? His face went pale, and he said, "Yes, ma'am, it surely was." By that afternoon, the joint account was closed and the money was sitting safe in an account with only my name on it, the way the good things in my life have always been. The phone started ringing before I got home. Preston. Then Charisse, then Preston again. 11 calls, then the texts. "What did you do to the account? Call me." "This isn't funny, Maybelle." I turned the phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of coffee and watched it buzz itself quiet. The certified letter from my attorney reached their house that Friday. Notice of intent to enforce the promissory note, demand for the full balance due, and notice of my intent, as majority owner, to list the property for sale. Charis signed for it. I know because the receipt came back with her signature, the same loopy signature I taught her hand to make at the kitchen table 40 years ago. She called me that evening, and for the first time in 10 years, she called me Mama and meant it as a plea. "Mama, please. You can't be serious. This is our home. The children. Sophie, the baby. Where are we supposed to go? We can't cover the note and the mortgage both. Preston's deals are slow. We're already stretched thin. You'll ruin us." And I said very quietly, "Charisse, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just collecting what I'm owed. You're the one who decided I didn't belong. I'm only agreeing with you." She wept. She told me she was sorry, and I told her the truth. The same truth I'd say to anyone listening to me right now. "Baby, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry it's costing you something. If you were sorry for the thing itself, you'd have been sorry Thursday morning when my face was right there in front of you and you handed me that bag anyway. Preston came to my door the next week. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost the shine. Wrinkled shirt, grey in his face, eyes red. He stood in my little living room, the man who'd called me a chapter they'd closed, and he asked if he could sit down. I let him. He said the note alone would sink them, that the forced sale would wipe out what little equity they had after the agents and the costs, that Cherise wasn't sleeping, that his business was bleeding. He said, "Maybelle, I'll do anything." I was wrong. I was out of line. "Please," I asked him one question. "Preston, did you mean it? When you said people here don't need to know where Cherise came from, did you mean it?" And he couldn't answer. He looked at the floor, the way my daughter had looked at the floor over that bowl of gumbo all those years ago, and his silence told me everything. I stood up. I said, "You'll get your share of whatever's left after the house sells. It's more than I had when my husband died and I had a child to raise on $300. You'll survive. You'll just have to do it like the rest of us. Like the people you look down on." The house sold in 19 days. A young family with 2 little ones, paid cash, no fuss. I didn't go to the closing. I sent Robert with my power of attorney because I had no need to see their faces. When the proceeds settled, my share, combined with the note I called in and the savings I'd kept all those years, left me with more money than I'd ever held in my life. And for the first time since I was 32 years old, I was not afraid of running out. But here is the part I want you to hear, the part that matters more than the money. Sophie called me the night the sign went up in their yard. She was crying, and at first I thought she was angry at me, and my heart near broke. But she wasn't. She said, "Grandma, I'm not mad. I heard what they said to you. I was right there. I've been ashamed of them my whole life, and I didn't have words for it until now. Can I come live with you, please?" And I told her, "Baby, you can always come to me. You're the one good thing that came out of all of it." Cherise and Preston divorced before the next summer. The money troubles cracked open everything that was already rotten between them, and there wasn't enough good underneath to save it. Preston moved into an apartment and got passed over for the partnership he'd been chasing. Word travels, and people who'll throw out their own mother don't make the kind of partners anybody trusts. Cherise moved in with Adele, and I'm told that arrangement is exactly as miserable as you'd imagine. 2 proud women in a house too small for both their disappointments. And me? I took a portion of that money and I did something I'd dreamed of my whole life and never once let myself believe I'd have. I leased a little storefront downtown, painted the walls the warm gold of a summer afternoon, and I opened a lunch counter. "Maybelle's Table," the sign says. Soul food, the real kind, the kind my mother taught me, the kind my daughter used to love before she decided it was beneath her. Fried chicken on Tuesdays, smothered pork chops on Thursdays, pound cake every day until it's gone. Sophie came to live with me and worked the counter that first summer, and a food writer wandered in one afternoon and wrote about us, this woman who spent a lifetime cooking for everybody else and finally, at 68, opened a place of her own. People started coming from 2 towns over. There's a line out the door on Saturdays now. A letter came from Cherise about a year after that Thanksgiving. 6 pages, in that handwriting I taught her. She said she'd been in counseling. She said she finally understood that she'd spent her whole adult life ashamed of the very thing that should have made her proud, ashamed of being raised by a poor woman who worked her body to ruin to give her a future. She said she was sorry. She enclosed a check for $2,000, all she had, and she wrote that it wasn't to buy her way back. It was just to say she remembered now. She remembered who paid for everything. I read that letter 3 times. Then I signed the check over to Sophie's college fund, and I put the letter in my daddy's old ledger box, next to a photograph of Cherise at 6 years old riding on my shoulders at the county fair, both of us laughing. I haven't called her yet. Maybe one day I will. The anger has cooled enough that I can hold the memory of my little girl without it cutting me, and that's something. But I'm not ready, and I've learned, late in life, that I'm allowed to take my own time about my own heart. I stood behind my counter this morning, before we opened, in the gold light coming through the front windows, and my granddaughter brought me a cup of coffee, and we stood there together watching the street wake up. She asked me if I had any regrets. And I thought about it honestly, the way I try to think about everything. No, I told her, I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry my girl became someone who could do that to her own mother. But I don't regret standing up. I don't regret demanding to be treated like a human being. And I don't regret showing her and showing you that it is never too late, not at 60, not at 70, not ever, for a woman to stop making herself small for people who only love her when she's useful. I'm Maybelle Crawford. I'm 68 years old. On Thanksgiving morning, my daughter handed me a garbage bag and told me to disappear. So I gathered up everything I'd ever given her, everything I'd kept in my own name, because my daddy taught me how, and I walked out into the cold and started my life over, not out of spite, out of dignity, out of 43 years of being owed. And every morning now, when I turn the sign on my own door from closed to open, I remember that the woman they tried to throw away was the richest one in the room the whole time, and they never even knew it. For 43 years, I carried a single belief that turned out to be both my salvation and my blind spot. That if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, stayed quiet enough, my love would eventually be returned in kind. I was half right. The giving built a good life. The silence nearly buried me. What I understand now, standing behind my own counter at 68, is that everything that happened to Cherise was the harvest of seeds she chose to plant. You cannot spend a decade teaching yourself to be ashamed of your own mother and expect to reap closeness. You cannot hand a woman a garbage bag and expect to keep the house she paid for. Cause and effect doesn't bend for people just because they've convinced themselves they deserve better. Preston learned that when the partnership slipped through his fingers, because the world quietly notices who throws their family away, and it does not forget. What saved me was not luck, and it surely wasn't anger. Anger is loud and stupid. It spends itself fast. What saved me was something steadier. It was the plain decency my daddy handed down to me. The refusal to take what isn't mine, and the insistence on keeping what is, written down in a ledger so no one could rewrite my own history for me. It was the long, patient learning that came from a lifetime of watching how money and people actually work. The wisdom to put my name on a deed when my heart wanted to trust on a handshake. And it was the grit, the bone-deep stubbornness that got me up at 5 a.m. for 40 years, and got me up again the morning after that trash bag, dry-eyed and ready, when most people would have crawled into bed and stayed there. If I could press one thing into your hands, it would be this. Be good to people, genuinely good, but never confuse goodness with letting yourself be erased. Keep learning, keep your eyes open, keep your own records, because the people who love you the right way will never mind that you do. And when life knocks the wind clean out of you, when someone you raised looks you in the eye and tells you that you never belonged, find that hard, quiet place inside yourself and stand up out of it. Not to get even, to get free. Cherise sent me a check for $2,000 and 6 pages of sorrow, and I signed that check straight over to Sophie, because the future I was always trying to buy was never really my daughter's comfort. It was the chance for the next one to grow up knowing what dignity looks like. Sophie watched her grandmother get handed a trash bag and watched that same grandmother open her own door 3 months later, gold light coming through the windows, her name on the lease. That's the inheritance that mattered, not the money. The proof that it is never ever too late to stop making yourself small.